this Python and Django live code session. We're going to briefly work on closing a feature for the Jerry Live project, where we're building a shared notebook for elderly well-being, for helping caregivers to coordinate work and gain insights into the well-being or wellness of elderly residents of large care communities. This chart is our overview chart. It's a summary of the types of activities, caregiving activities, and the caregivers who are providing those activities, such as nurses or volunteers. We've got cleaning, we've got food preparation. We want to know what role that each type of caregiving activities fall into, and what type of work they're overall spending most of the time on in the care community, as well as proportionally for each role, how they're spending their time, how they're dividing their time. And this is the full minutes, so that you have that information available, as well as more specific in the proportion, but that could also be something needed for example, staffing. We need to know how many person hours are being consumed by particular types of work, and make sure that you have the right amount of staff with the right skill set. Essentially, what we're trying to help. It takes the guesswork out of staffing, typically institutional caregiving or care centers. We believe that not only is it a top priority to promote the wellness of the residents, and not only to ensure that they have their foundational needs met: food, clothing, shelter, sanitation, hygiene, obviously nutrition when it comes with food, as well as any kind of medications. But then a layer above that is they're living a fulfilling life. They're actually doing fulfilling activities, like being able to go to the woods or listen to music or have group activities. Now, as a complement to that, and this is what we'll focus on in this pull request, we want to make sure that the staff and volunteers, so the caregivers who are providing these activities, that they're not overburdened, that they're doing work that's meaningful and that's within their kind of skill set, so that their well-being can increase. And we believe that a rising tide lifts all boats, so we're trying to improve the overall picture in these care communities. Got a particular chart here. So we want to know historically, as well as just like overall. This is telling you overall, ever, within whatever the time frame is. This time is not a dimension here, that the staff are doing these proportion of activities. The nurses are spending 41% of their time cleaning, hypothetical data, 59% of their time with food preparation. That tells us, as long as we've been collecting the data, this is a summary of all of the data. We could, of course, divide that by year, month or day, or whatever. Granularity is relevant for planning purposes, and do year-over-year stuff. So that's where we're kind of heading, at least being able to compare. And the first glance of that was this chart, where you can see time period of 1 year, and how many minutes each day. So you could kind of see patterns that might emerge. There might be a pattern that on Wednesday there's maybe more activities for some reason. And these, this program can't explain why. It's more providing insights that then can be used for decision making and realization from the manager's perspective, perhaps. Now we're adding this proportional chart because this only tells us the number of minutes. It doesn't tell us who's involved here. It doesn't tell us what they're doing. So we're taking this data and slicing it in different dimensions and presenting it in different ways. This is a speculative dashboard. We don't know exactly what kind of questions. We have pretty good insights into the care systems, particularly my colleague and partner Mario, who works directly in these institutions, kind of knows from a management perspective what's important. And what's important is that as mentioned before, that the particular roles are doing relevant work that's within their skill set, and that they're also not overburdened, and that they have support. So nurses, for example, maybe you shouldn't be spending a lot of their time doing cleaning or food preparation. I'm not sure. This is hypothetical again. But maybe they would be doing skilled tasks within their purview and help having other roles that would do the cleaning, for example. Not only that, but that they would have enough staff to fulfill the duties. This chart is aiming for the first question: is how are staff spending their time? And it's looking over time, like over a period of time, because there's changes and fluctuations. And for example, a big event could be a workers' strike, where a particular group of workers would go on strike, which has happened recently in Finland on a few occasions. And you would see a gap of that role in the chart. Now, all this said, this is a software project, and I've got to figure out the nuts and bolts of how to get these representations on the screen. And when building this chart, we're using the Plotly library, Plotly.js. And it's been actually on top of Plotly. We're using Plotly Express, which is a very nice layer on top of Plotly. Plotly is a very robust and fully featured plotting library. It's a holistic design library, and it's been under continual development and evolution for a while, so it's very mature as well. So that's why we're kind of banking on Plotly. I did a few experiments, and I've done research periodically on the state of JavaScript plotting and charting libraries. And particularly since we're working with Python, I want to move into Python territory here. So Plotly Express not only gives us Pythonic way of defining these Plotly charts, but it also gives us higher level semantics, where I essentially just provide the data and I tell the chart, hey, this x-axis is such data and the y-axis should be this data. I don't have to worry about mapping data or splitting it out into arrays and then kind of maybe so the underlying logic for that. It's more declarative is what I'm trying to drive at. I don't have to do imperative logic to say create a list of this property from this list of dictionaries. That's our x-axis. I just give it a list of dictionaries. And everything typically has worked. There was one bug I found working with a very small sample of data. It was kind of an edge case I encountered where we're breaking this work percentage by role here. Nurse on the top and volunteer on the bottom is how it split it out. And in my sample data, this little dummy data or sample data I generated, the volunteer role had more work observation, you call, or like data recorded activities than the nurse. This was just this random data I was making up, which causes this top chart with only one observation to render in an unexpected way. And I started the pull request, but I couldn't figure it out, so let's look at the code real quick. This is kind of the interesting part of the work, is getting into the meaningful code where we're trying to figure out domain-specific problems, but then sometimes we got to jump down a layer and figure out some kind of typically, we encounter a bug with our framework or something like that, and they'll derail us a little bit. We'll have to get into the framework or library level and debug things. Thankfully, in Python and Django, and Plotly for that matter, I haven't had to spend a lot of time debugging the framework, which means I'm more productive. I'm able to actually just write the code that focuses on our business logic, our domain logic. So I'm just grateful for that, because that can be sometimes you're cobbling together a framework from various component libraries, and then you're having to debug the intersections of these libraries and why this testing framework doesn't work with this version of your UI components. So again, that can just be very unproductive and frankly just unfulfilling. So that's part of the reason we're shifting more to more emphasis on the Python part of this software stack. Move as much in the Python. did encounter a bug here. I wasn't sure if initially it was a bug. I opened a bug report, but essentially this view, the work report view, so here's like, we're comparing all these charts. So it gets it needs to get data from the database and do a little bit of aggregation and summarization. But pretty much I've been able to do that just with the Django framework here, with some annotations, or directly in SQL. And this particular chart, work percentage, particular role, is essentially I created some temporary data that's essentially the data that comes out of the database query that I've written. This is a list of dictionaries with a date string, which is interesting because it's not a native date object, so the libraries can have to do a little bit of manipulation there on my behalf. I don't have to do that. No imperative logic, like I mentioned, it's just declarative. I'm passing some data. This is the x-axis, this is the y-axis, and underneath things, the abstractions are taking care of that for me. So I can just think at the level of what kind of chart I'm going to build, and not how to get the data too much into the right shape. This is a bit of SQL involved. So the Django ORM isn't designed for analytic queries. That's okay. So we have dictionary items with the date that the work occurred, the role who conducted the work, and what type of work they did, food prep. And this is an aggregated feature that looks at their full workload for that role for that day, and figures out that this particular unit of work was this percentage. So this is actually, I think this is, no, the volunteer one. So that day, volunteers spent 100% of their time on food prep. This is summarizing, aggregating the day to one aggregate statistic. Food prep, volunteer, basics, 100% of the time spent there. Cool. So here's what the data look like, and here's this where I'm defining the chart. So I'm just I'm creating a plotly bar chart, and I'm passing it the data is just a list of dictionaries. I'm saying the x-axis is dates, and the y-axis is that the percentage of total value for the week. And it should represent as a percentage, but then at the top it didn't quite behave correctly. That's where I was like, what's going on here? Did I do something wrong with the data? Again, this came from my SQL query. Maybe my SQL was messy. So I provided a sample of this data along with the code, and was able to get some pretty useful responses. Not only a specific way to fix this particular issue, but more illumination as to what's going on. And it opened up this whole conversation here as to like, is this a bug? Should it behave this way? And it turned out it's basically a bug. It's a very small edge case that I bumped into. But the chart, it was unexpected from my perspective, and certainly a bit beyond my comfort zone. It can be fixed in the short term by adding this line, which we'll do in just a moment. But in the long term, it looks like they're going to improve the Plotly library, which the Plotly Express or Plotly Pi is kind of relying mostly on Plotly for all the rendering layers. I think Plotly Pi is more doing aggregations and transpilation from Python to this JavaScript syntax or JSON chart declaration. I'm not sure really, but I'm interested to learn more. Anyway, it saves me a lot of time and keeps me working in Python. So here's the key though. So we'll come back to this in just a moment. We'll hopefully just fix it. The y-axis and the x-axis, as you know, it's two-dimensional. But then we have series, and this is where the chart kind of where the complexity enters. Not only working with date times is complex, but then having a faceted or multi-series chart. This is also really stuff that I don't have the wherewithal or experience to deliver, and I just need to focus on building a product. So hence, we're grateful for Plotly in general. So it is faceted by the third dimension of roles. So that's why we have this volunteer dimensions represented here, X and Y, facets, and color. Well, a pretty compact way of describing this. You can go to this interactive legend. Really nice. So we're using localized text for our titles. That way we can translate this. And I had to override the labels so that I can localize their text as well. And I don't know what this did, but it fixed something. Not sure I might delete. So we'll just try to briefly wrap up here. I'm not sure what that. Oh, I think it was this on the bars. Text auto. I should comment. Yeah, it adds the text to bars, so I'm just going to add that to remind myself. Cool. So I've got this chart object. I haven't passed it to the template at that point. I do that. Let's do some couple of things. There's this axis, instead of 0 to 1, I wanted it to 0 to 100%. So I format the percentages. And there is some automatic, this is a little bit, well, strange, but it's, when you're faceting the data, it was like adding some unwanted text there. Labels right here. Caregiver role is prefixing or prepending the dimension name to the thing, and I think it's self-explanatory. Just that this should be volunteer, that should be nurse. I think that's a little easier to read, and we can localize. That's the important part, is we're localizing this. So let's then do a similar thing, where we're going to make one more modification. So we're going to ensure that all bar widths are 1 day. Because what happened is when there was only one observation, one datum, it was kind of squeezing down to 1 millisecond. The charting library, frankly, can't really know that this represents a day. We can tell it, but does this represent a millisecond, an hour, minute, day? And to me, it's sort of obvious that it's representing a day, but that's based on my experience with biases. But the computers are very literal, and in any case, they just decided it was kind of a bug that it should probably represent it as a day, and means time, or some smart granularity, in other words, so it should be smarter. They opened 2 issues. This is a very interesting discussion. So if you're interested to follow along with that, it's Pi issue 3715. So let's go ahead and just add this. I'm going to now modify the recipe just slightly, and then call it good. Quick break quote. So 1 day equals, I'm going to do this myself a little bit of a reminder, 24 hour, 60 minutes, 60 seconds by 1,000 milliseconds. Alright, so 1 day, then I can do this, update the traces on that. And if this works, then I'll come in and switch offline and come back a little bit later and work on another forward place. Make these paragraphs kind of there on things. So yeah, let's just refresh the page and we'll hopefully see some action here. Perfect. Okay, the access formatting didn't take effect. So I'll have to come back to there's two separate issues. And I'll post that in the chat and put it along with the screenshot. But that's it. So mostly just doing some explanation. I think honestly the explanation is sometimes more interesting than the code, and especially when you're able to work at the level of your domain logic, so you can see what problem you're trying to solve. So yeah, we'll continue with this in another live stream. Thanks very much for your time.